Western Marxism, Chapter 1, Section 2, and the events of October 1917 in the East. The First World War doesn't provoke the same emotions in Asia as we saw in Europe, and not only because the battlegrounds are thousands of miles apart. In the colonies and semi-colonies, the capitalist colonist system had revealed its terrible load of oppression and violence long before August 1914. For China, the tragic event was clearly the Opium Wars. Between 1851 and 1864, in an attempt to neutralize the British drug traffickers and put an end to the opium trade, whose devastating effects were in plain view for the whole world, the Taiping Rebellion was developing. The bloodiest civil war in world history, estimated to produce between 20 million and 30 million dead. After powerfully contributing to provoking it, the West then moves to benefit from it, as it's able to extend its control over a country that is torn and defenseless. What follows is a historic period in which China is crucified, since Russia and Japan joined the ranks of the Western butchers. And the Western cannons and the most terrible insurrections in history are joined by natural catastrophes against which a devastated country can't muster the least resistance. Undoubtedly, the number of victims has never been so great in the history of the world. Compared to this immense tragedy, the outbreak of the First World War is a small thing. Urged to intervene on the side of Great Britain, Sun Yat-sen, president of the republic that surged from the revolution of 1911 and the overthrow of the Manchu dynasty, made clear to Lloyd George in a famous letter that the disputes between whites did not interest China. The victory of this or that group would not change in the least the capitalist and colonialist attitude of the West. On the other hand, the Bolshevik rise to power made Sun Yat-sen feel the hope of the end of the tragedy begun by the Opium Wars, and this rose his enthusiasm. Not only does it promise to put an end to the war, but especially colonial slavery. This second aspect is the one that will lead the Chinese leader to take stock of a chapter of history whose conclusion can finally be glimpsed thanks to the October Revolution. The Redskins of America have already been exterminated, and a similar fate looms over the rest of the colonies, including China. The situation is desperate, but suddenly 150 million men of the Slavic race have risen to oppose imperialism, capitalism, to combat inequality, and to defend humanity. And just like that, a great hope for humanity is born, which no one saw coming: the Russian Revolution. Naturally, imperialism responds in short order. The world powers have attacked Lenin because they wish to destroy a prophet of humanity, who will be hard-pressed to renege on his call for the liberation of people oppressed by colonial domination. It's true that Sun Yat-sen is not a Marxist or communist, but the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party of July 1st, 1921 can only be understood through the great hope described by him with perhaps naive words, but because of that, much more effective. In light of all this, the characterization of the 20th century as a brief century, which according to Eric Hobsbawm begins with the traumatic experience of the First World War, suffers of Eurocentrism. In the intervention of the delegates from Indochina in the Tours Congress of the French Socialist Party in December 26, 1920, we find an anti-literam critique with a similar vision. Quote, "It's been half a century since French capitalism arrived at Indochina. We've been conquered at gunpoint in the name of capitalism. Since then, not only have we been shamefully subjugated and exploited, I find it impossible, in the few minutes that I have, to list all the atrocities committed by the bandits of capital in Indochina. The prisons, much more numerous than the schools, are always open and terrifyingly overpopulated. Any native that is suspected of having socialist ideals is imprisoned and sometimes even condemned to death without trial. Here, the so-called Indo-Chinese justice has two weights and two measures. The Annamites do not enjoy the same guarantees as the Europeans and the Europeanized." End quote. Having pronounced this terrible accusation, the Indo-Chinese delegates, which later would become famous throughout the world thanks to Ho Chi Minh, conclude, "We see in the adherence to the Third International the formal promise that the Socialist Party will finally give colonial problems the importance they deserve." Despite the cautious tone, far removed from all polemics, one point stands out with clarity. The turning point in world history is not August 1914, which sees a tragedy that has been unfolding in the colonies propagating in Europe as well, but October 1917. That is, the revolutions which aroused the hope of the end of that same tragedy also in the colonies. Already Lenin, obviously, highlighted the horrors of colonialism. The most liberal and radical politicians of a free Great Britain became full-fledged Genghis Khans when it came to governing in India. Before then, they had the lessons of Marx, denouncing liberal England for their treatment of Ireland, a colony located in Europe, a policy more despicable than that which Tsarist and autocratic Russia carried out over Poland, a policy so terroristic to the point that it was unheard of in Europe and can only be compared with the Mongols, as attested by Ho Chi Minh's call to his party comrades urging them not to lose sight of the colonial question. Understandably, Marx's lesson over the macroscopic exclusionary clauses of liberal freedom found more attentive ears in the East than the West. This is a relevant difference, but it will undoubtedly not be the last.